Troublesome Engines by the Reverend W. Awdry. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Henry and the Elephant. Thomas the Tank Engine puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle one day. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform at the station to see how he was getting along. He looked at his watch as Thomas stopped to let passengers off. "Well done, Thomas," he said. "You are right on time and really reliable." "Thank you, sir," whistled Thomas. "Oh, right on time and really reliable," hummed the coaches. Then the conductor blew his whistle and Thomas set off for his next journey. But the big engines were not feeling cheerful at all. Henry and Gordon were lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much, and they had more work to do. They couldn't wait in the shed till it was time and find their coaches at the platform. Oh, no. They had to get the coaches themselves, and they didn't like that one bit. "Where's Thomas?" asked Henry. "He should be collecting our coaches." "We get no rest," complained James. He edged angrily onto the turntable and spoke rudely to Henry. "What's the matter, Henry? There's no rain today. Stop worrying and do some work instead." "I'm not afraid of getting wet anymore," retorted Henry. "Anyway, you look silly enough to be a clown. You should join the circus." "Oh," said Edward, who was shunting nearby. "So you've heard the news?" "What news?" grunted Gordon. "About the circus." "Edward, what are you talking about?" groaned James. "The circus has arrived," explained Edward. "I've been shunting very special freight cars. Sir Topham Hatt has asked for your help, too." The engines were very excited and forgot that they were tired and cross. They all wanted to help shunt the special cars and coaches, and they all had plenty of work to do. But when it was time for the circus to leave, Gordon and Henry were cross all over again when James got to pull the train away. A little later, Sir Topham Hatt returned to the sheds. "Come along, Henry. A tunnel has blocked down the line. You'll need to take some workmen to investigate." Henry grumbled away and found 2 freight cars to carry the workmen and the tools. pushing cars, grumbled Henry as he pushed them along the line. Presently they came to the tunnel and stopped just outside. They tried to look through it, but it was quite dark. No daylight shone from the other end. The workmen took their tools and went inside. It was very dark and quiet, but not for long. All of a sudden, Henry heard a loud sound within the tunnel. "Help!" shouted the workmen, and they ran out. The foreman was outside the tunnel, having a cup of tea. "We started to dig at the block, but it grunted and moved," one frightened workman said. "Rubbish," said the foreman. "It's not rubbish. It's big and alive. We're not going in there again." "Right," said the foreman. "I shall jump into a car and Henry shall push it out." "Wheesh," said Henry unhappily. He hated tunnels. He had been shut up in a tunnel once because of the rain, but this was worse. Something big and alive was inside. "Peep, peep, I don't want to go in." "Neither do I," said the driver, "but we must clear the line." Oh dear," puffed Henry, and he puffed slowly and fearfully into the dark, dark tunnel. Then there was trouble. He had bumped into something enormous. Henry's driver shut off steam at once. "What is it, Henry?" I don't know, but I can't move it. It's moving me. It's pushing me backwards. Help!" It turned out that the block was indeed alive and very strong, and it was pushing the whole train backwards. Out of the tunnel came Henry, then the cars, and last of all, a large, cross elephant. "Well, I never!" cried the foreman. "It's an elephant from the circus." Henry's driver put on his brakes, and a man ran to telephone the keeper. The elephant stopped pushing and came towards the workmen. They gave him some sandwiches and cake, so he forgot that he was cross and remembered that he was hungry. He drank 3 buckets of water without stopping and was just about to drink another one when Henry let off steam. Cried the frightened elephant, and he sprayed water all over Henry by mistake. Poor Henry. He didn't like that at all. The elephant and his keeper were soon reunited, and the workmen jumped into their cars, laughing at their adventure. But Henry was most upset. "An elephant pushed me," he said as he pushed them home. "An elephant hoosed me." In the shed that night, he told the other engines about the elephant. And I'm sorry to say that instead of laughing and telling him not to be silly, they looked sad and said, "Oh, you poor engine, you have been treated badly, haven't you?" Tenders and turntables. The big stations at both ends of the line each have a turntable. Sir Topham Hatt had them made so that Edward, Gordon, James, and Henry can be turned around. It is very dangerous for tender engines to go backwards at fast speeds. Tank engines like Thomas do not necessarily need turntables. They can go just as well backwards as forwards. But if you had heard Gordon talking a short while ago, you would have thought that Sir Topham Hatt had given him a tender just to show how important he was. "You just don't understand, little Thomas," he said one day. "We tender engines have a position to keep up. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important. And for Sir Topham Hatt to make us shunted, dirty sidings, well, it's just not the proper thing." And Gordon puffed away in a very dignified manner. Thomas just chuckled to his coaches. "Oh, poor old Gordon, he is upset." And off he went with Annie and Clarabelle. Gordon took his coaches and passengers to the terminus and waited until they had all gotten out. Then he had to shunt the coaches to another platform. He was most definitely in a bad temper. "It's disgraceful! It's disgraceful!" Then he ran backwards to the turntable. The turntable was in a windy place close by the sea. It was only just big enough for Gordon, and if he was not on it just right, he would put the table out of balance and make it very difficult to turn. Now on this particular day, Gordon was in an exceptionally foul mood, even for him, and the wind was blowing fiercely. Gordon's driver tried to make him stop in the right place, but Gordon wouldn't try, and he wouldn't stop in the right place, no matter what they tried. At last, the driver and fireman gave it up. "We can't turn you around like this, Gordon. Your tender upsets the balance. Now, if you were a nice tank engine, you'd be all right. But you're a tender engine, and we can't turn you around. You will have to pull the next train backwards." When Gordon came to the platform, some little boys shout out, "Hey, look! Come quick! There's a new tank engine!" "Oh, wait, it's only Gordon back to front." "Oh, the indignity," sighed Gordon, and he puffed off to the junction. Thomas was waiting for Gordon when he arrived. "Hello, Gordon. Playing tank engines, are we? Sensible engine. Take my tip. Scrap your tender and have yourself a nice bunker." Gordon said nothing. He just let off steam feebly. Then James came along on his way to the turntable. "Hello, Gordon. Looks like you got yourself stuck on the turntable, eh?" "Be careful, James," snapped Gordon. "You might stick too, you know." "Oh, please. I'm not as fat as you. Now you just watch me." James then went to the turntable and stopped at just the right place to balance it. It could swing easily now. The fireman turned the handle, and James began to turn, much too easily. Then Gordon arrived to see everything. The wind caught James and puffed him around and around like a top, and he just couldn't stop. "Well, well, James," chuckled Gordon, "are we playing roundabouts?" At last the wind died down, and James stopped turning and rolled off the table to the engine shed, feeling very, very giddy and very sick. That night, Gordon, James, and Henry had an indignation meeting at the sheds. Gordon did most of the talking, though. "It's shameful to treat tender engines like this. Henry gets drenched by an elephant, James spins around on the turntable like a top, and I have to go backwards with everyone laughing at us. And not only that, but Sir Topham Hatt makes us shunt in dirty sidings," they said in unison. "Now listen," continued Gordon, "we will act tomorrow. Sir Topham Hatt will look silly. Now, here's what we'll do." He whispered something to James and Henry. They all agreed on Gordon's plan and went to sleep, ready to enact it when they woke up the next day. The engines had decided to go on strike. Trouble in the shed. Sir Topham Hatt sat in his office and listened. A loud chorus was outside his office window and echoing throughout the station. The passengers were angry. "Oh, what a nuisance passengers can be," he sighed. "How can I possibly work with this much noise?" Then there was a knock on the door. The station master came in, looking very worried. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking. There's no train, and the passengers are saying that this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We cannot allow that." He rose up from his chair and picked up his hat. "Will you please quieten the passengers? I shall go and speak to Henry." Sir Topham Hatt found Gordon, James, and Henry in the shed, looking very sulky. Their drivers and firemen tried to make them start, but they refused to move. "Come along, Henry. It's time that your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon, "and neither are James or I. We refuse to shunt like common little tank engines. That was Thomas's job. We are important tender engines. You fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." And all three engines let off steam in a very cheeky way. "Oh, indeed. We'll see about that," said Sir Topham Hatt. "My engines do what they are told, and no engine on my railway is too important for small jobs." And he hurried along to find Edward. "The yard has never been the same since Thomas left for his branch line," he thought sadly. Edward was shunting in the station yards when Sir Topham Hatt arrived. "Leave those freight cars, please, Edward. I want you to push coaches in the yard today for me." "Thank you, sir," said Edward. "That will be a nice change." "That's a good engine. Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the three engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But the next morning, Edward looked very unhappy. Gordon then came past, clanking and hissing rudely at him. "Bless me," said Sir Topham Hatt. "What a noise!" "They all hiss at me, sir," said Edward. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I had black wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward, you have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same, you would feel much happier back in your own yard. We do need another tank engine here." And so Sir Topham Hatt went to an engine workshop where he found all sorts of tank engines. At last he saw a smart little green saddle tank engine with 4 wheels. "That's the one," he thought. "Oh, you there! If I choose you, will you work hard?" The green engine was excited. "Oh, sir! Yes, sir!" "That's a good engine. Have you got a name?" "No, sir, I haven't." "In that case, I will call you—" Sir Topham Hatt paused and thought for a few moments. "Percy. How do you like that?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." And so Sir Topham Hatt brought Percy back to the yard and introduced him to Edward. "Edward," he called, "this here is Percy. Will you show him everything?" Percy soon learned what he had to do, and he and Edward had a happy afternoon. Then Henry came by, hissing as usual. But Percy wasn't frightened of Henry's size or mood, and he went, "Whoot!" Henry jumped and ran back to the shed, very frightened. "How beautifully you wheeshed him," laughed Edward. "I can't wheesh or make a noise like that." "Oh," said Percy, "that's nothing. You should hear them in the workshop. Sometimes you have to wheesh loudly just to make yourself heard." Next morning, Thomas arrived in the yards. "Hello, Edward," he said. "Hello, Thomas," said his friend, and he introduced Thomas to Percy. "Sir Topham Hatt sent for me," Thomas said excitedly. "It must be something very important. I expect he needs my help." "Oh, he does indeed, Thomas. Shh, here he comes now." "Well done, Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt. "You have been quick. Now then, Gordon, James, and Henry are sulking in the shed. They say they will not shunt like common little tank engines, so I have shut them up. I want you and Edward to run the main line for a little while." "Common little tank engines indeed," snorted Thomas. "We'll show them." "That's a good engine. And Percy will help out too." "Oh, sir! Yes, sir! Please, sir!" answered Percy. So Edward and Thomas pulled trains on the main line. Starting on opposite ends, they would whistle to each other as they passed by. Percy was tasked to work the branch line. Thomas was worried about Annie and Clarabelle, but both driver and conductor promised to take care of them. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew that the bigger engines were having a lesson. Gordon, James, and Henry stayed shut up in the shed, and they were cold, lonely, and miserable. They wished now that they hadn't been so silly. Percy runs away. Gordon, James, and Henry had been shut up in the shed for several days for being naughty, and they were miserable, longing to be let out again. At last, Sir Topham Hatt arrived and opened the shed doors. "I hope you are sorry," he said, "and that you understand that every job on the railway is important. Thomas and Edward have run the main line very nicely, and we have a new tank engine called Percy who helps pull coaches. But now they need a change, and I will let you out now if you promise to work hard." "Yes, sir," said the three engines, their faces beaming up at once. "We will." "That's good, but please remember that this no shunting nonsense must stop." Sir Topham Hatt then told Thomas, Edward, and Percy that they could play on the branch line for a few days. And they ran off happily and found Annie and Clarabelle at the junction. The two coaches were so pleased to see Thomas again that he took them out for a run at once. Edward and Percy played with the freight cars and pushed them into their proper sidings. The freight cars made a terrible fuss. "Ow, ow, ow! Stop! Stop! Stop!" But the two engines just laughed and kept on shunting until the cars were tidily arranged. Next, Edward took some empty cars to the quarry, and Percy was left alone. He didn't mind that at all. He liked watching trains go by and being cheeky to the engines. As they passed by, Percy would make noises at them, and Gordon, James, and Henry got very cross. After a while, Percy took some freight cars over the main line to another siding. When they were tidied up, he ran back onto the main line and waited for the signalman to set the points so he could cross back to the yard. He was eager to work, but Percy was being rather careless and not paying attention. Edward had warned Percy, "Be careful on the main line, whistle to the signalman that you are there." But Percy had forgotten to whistle, and the signalman was so busy that he had forgotten about Percy. Bells rang in the signal box. The man answered, saying that the line was clear, and set the signals for the next train. Percy waited and waited. The points were still against him. Then he looked along the main line. "Beep, beep!" he whistled in horror, for coming straight towards him was Gordon with the express. "Ah!" cried Gordon. "Get out of my way!" His driver shut off steam and applied the brakes. Percy's driver turned on full steam. Back, Percy, back! But Percy's wheels wouldn't turn quickly enough. Gordon was coming so fast that it seemed he couldn't stop. Percy just shut his eyes tightly and braced himself for the crash. His driver and fireman then jumped out. Percy then opened his eyes. Gordon had stopped, with Percy's buffers just a few inches from his own. But Percy had begun to move backwards, and he was very, very frightened. "I won't stay here, I'll run away," he puffed. He was soon clear of the station and running as fast as he could. He whistled through Edward Station and was still so frightened that he ran up Gordon's Hill without stopping. After that, he was tired, but he couldn't stop. He had no driver to shut off steam and apply the brakes. Oh dear, I shall have to run until my wheels are worn out. I want to stop, he puffed. Just then, he passed another signal box. The signalman on duty saw that Percy was in trouble, so he kindly set the switch. "I know just what you want, little Percy," he called out. Percy then puffed wearily onto a nice empty siding, ending in a big bank of earth. He was too tired now to care where he went. I want to stop! I have stopped," he puffed thankfully. And indeed, the earth bank had stopped him. His bunker was now buried in it. "Never mind, Percy," said the workman as they dug him out. "You shall have a drink and some coal, and then you'll feel better." Presently, Gordon arrived with a winch of wire rope on his front buffer beam. "Well done, Percy," he laughed as they hooked the rope onto Percy's coupling rod. "You started so quickly that you stopped a nasty accident." "I'm sorry I was cheeky," said Percy. "You were clever to stop." Then Gordon helped pull Percy out from the bank. The two engines are now great friends. Percy now works in the yard and finds coaches for the trains. He is still cheeky, but he just can't help it. He's just that sort of engine. But now he is most careful when he goes out on the main line.